Welcome to American Gang Wars. Today we're going to be tapping into the streets of California. And we're going to be looking at the Paramount gang member named Robert Hinojos, aka Dopey, who became a made man by the Mexican Mafia after murdering a man who owed a $10K debt. Now Robert Hinojos, aka Dopey, was a part of the Brown Nation Paramount gang. He had spent nearly 15 years in prison for being a part of a drug prison smuggling ring. Not only was he a part of the Brown Nation, but he also was a part of another special group of individuals called La Clica, which were a group of Mexican Mafia associates who are known to collect money on behalf of lling. Now, Dopey eventually wanted to become a full-fledged member of the Mexican Mafia, and he soon would get his chance. In May of 2016, Dopey was called upon by the Mexican Mafia for a job. There was a man by the name of Mario Chavara, aka Snaps, who owed a drug debt to lling, and he had not paid this debt and had been avoiding them. And by not paying his debt, he was now put on La Lista, aka Greenlight, by the Mexican Mafia. Now Mario had got his drugs from another man by the name of Velasquez, aka Perico. Now because Velasquez had fronted Snaps the dope, he also was partially responsible for the drug debt owed. But not only that, Velasquez had failed to collect the money owed to the Mexican Mafia. So by not completing the task himself by getting the money, he was also on the bad side of the Mexican Mafia. Now Dopey was having issues reaching out to Snaps because he wasn't returning his phone calls. So Dopey reached out to Velasquez to get in contact with Mario and to tell him that he wanted to set up a meeting the following day so they can discuss the debt that was owed. That same day that Dopey spoke with Velasquez, he will also speak with his girlfriend by the name of Trisha, who's currently in jail on multiple charges. Now, because she was in jail, the conversation is automatically being recorded by authorities. So as Dopey spoke with her, he spoke in codes. He basically told her that he was given an opportunity at a promotion, and if he did his job right, he would become a made man. He would also tell his girlfriend that his mother was aware of his possible promotion also. Now, the following day, on May 13, 2016, Dopey had met with Velasquez, Juan Acosta, and a few other men at a Denny's restaurant in Paramount. The only person not there was Snaps, the man who owed the $10K drug debt. Now, as they sat down, the group would start to discuss the current situation and how to handle it. Velasquez and Acosta would tell Dopey that they had been trying to collect the $10K from Snaps, but they were unsuccessful. Now, eventually, the men would continue to talk and order food, and while eating, Dopey would once again attempt to call Snaps over the phone. Once again, no answer. Now, once the group finally finished their food, they decided and agreed to go look for Snaps together. Dopey would drive in his black 300C Chrysler, and Velasquez and Acosta would drive in their SUV. They would drive near the 8200 block of Ackley Street, nearby where Snaps lived at. Once they arrived, Acosta would park the SUV, and Velasquez would get out the car, waiting for Dopey to pull up. Acosta would start to roll up a joint as he sat in the SUV waiting around. Finally, Dopey arrived as he drove around, scanning the area. Velasquez stood in the middle of the street, and that's when Dopey pulled up next to him, and the two began talking. Eventually, Velasquez leaned his head in closer inside the window of the car, and that's when Dopey put out a gun and opened fire. Velasquez tried to back away, but he was hit critically with one shot into his chest as he fell backwards onto the pavement. Dopey would immediately drive off. Acosta would see this and immediately pull up, and Velasquez would crawl inside the passenger door, yelling out, "He shot me, he shot me." Acosta would then speed away and drive Velasquez to Bellflower Hospital. Once they parked, a deputy nearby also walked up. The sheriff would then walk up to the car and see Velasquez in the passenger seat bleeding with a gunshot wound to the chest. Velasquez would then plead to the deputy to help him, telling him that he doesn't want to die. Velasquez would then tell the sheriff that he was shot by a bald Hispanic male with tattoos who drove a black 300C Chrysler. Eventually, he would lose consciousness. Bellflower Hospital did not have an emergency room, so the hospital had to transport Velasquez to a nearby hospital, and the closest hospital was Long Beach Hospital. But not long after arriving at around 1:17 p.m., 44-year-old Hector Velasquez was pronounced dead. Officers would then immediately begin their investigation. Juan Acosta would talk to the police, but he would tell officers that he didn't arrive on scene till after the shooting, so therefore he did not see who the shooter was. Police would then canvass the area, but residents would also refuse to talk to the officers. But while on scene, the officers would retrieve 5 9mm shell casings from that scene. They would then leave the area and head to the Denny's where the men met at to retrieve surveillance footage. The footage would show a group of men, including Velasquez, Acosta, and Dopey, all arriving at Denny's and also leaving Denny's. Although they had a little blur shot of his face, they still didn't know who Dopey was. Now, 3 days later after this conversation, on May 16th, Trisha would call Dopey and immediately congratulate him on his promotion. He would then tell her that the bosses were pleased and that he was just waiting for his paperwork. Now remember, they got to speak in code because Trisha is currently in jail. But also in that same phone call, he would tell Trisha that it will be several more months before everything cleared, simply meaning he was waiting for the Mexican Mafia to put his membership to vote. Now, several months would then pass, and on October 26th, police would find a black 300C that Velasquez had told them about before he died. Now, the car was registered to a woman named Aragon, who was one of Dopey's other girlfriends. Officers would then find Dopey's wallet inside the car, along with a bag of weed, and forensics would also find gunshot residue on the passenger door. This would lead them to serving a warrant on Dopey's home, and they would find $10K in cash and a box of .38 ammunition. Dopey would then be arrested. Now, about a month later, on November 15th, Dopey would be placed in a cell with the Mexican Mafia member, and they would speak about the murder. Dopey was unaware that the conversation was being recorded. Dopey would ask the Mexican Mafia member how long he thought it would take for gunshot residue to stay in the car, because he wasn't sure if the residue was still inside the car because it had been months since the shooting happened. Now, a few days later, his girlfriend, Aragon, would show up to visit him while in jail. And she would tell him that she believed Snaps was cooperating with the police. And before she left, she would also tell Dopey that she would handle the situation by the end of the day. Now, hours later, at around 4:20 p.m., Snaps stood in his driveway in front of his house when 2 men walked up. Snaps and the 2 men would exchange words, and that's when one of the men would pull out a gun and shoot Snaps multiple times. The men would flee the scene as Snaps collapsed on the ground, bleeding in his driveway. Police would be called and the EMTs would arrive and transfer him to the hospital, where Snaps would be pronounced dead at 4:30 p.m. Now, eventually, Dopey would get his wish and he would become a member of lling. Now, according to former Mexican Mafia member, boxer Enriquez, multiple respected members pushed for Dopey's induction, which included Big Hazard member Jose Gonzalez, aka Joker, and Michael Torres. And sometime later, Dopey was officially charged with first-degree murder. Now, during his trial, the prosecution would argue that Dopey committed this murder for one reason and one reason only, and that was to become a member of the Mexican Mafia. Now, the defense would argue the complete opposite. They would agree that Dopey was a gangster, but they stated that there was zero evidence that proved his motives had anything solely to do with him becoming a member of the Mexican Mafia. But multiple witnesses who would testify on both sides would agree that Dopey had officially become a member of the Mexican Mafia at the time. And by the end of the trial, Robert Hinojos, aka Dopey, would be found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 life sentences in prison. And as of today, in 2025, is currently serving out his sentence at Pleasant State Valley Prison. I want to thank everybody for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.